Hello everybody, SOS here. It's time for a new video. I want to wish everybody very happy holidays. Well, actually, the holidays have technically been over for quite a little while now, but number one, I had planned to shoot this video during the holidays, but for various reasons I won't get into, that wasn't possible. I didn't want to wait until next Halloween to do it, so I figured I would just go ahead. The truth is, at this point, it's April. So I figured what I would do, seeing as I am still in the holiday spirit, despite how ridiculous that seems, I figured I would, since it's April now, make it a halfway to Halloween video. This way I don't have to wait until this upcoming Halloween time to do the video and then feel like I'm forced to do a review of the new Halloween film and figure it into this list. So then this way I can just do the list as is and then review the other Halloween film at a later time. Spirit of the holidays is still with me. I've still got my Christmas tree up. I was going to leave it up until I did this video anyways. And if you're like me, and I know a lot of you are, the holidays don't start with Christmas. They don't start even with Thanksgiving. They start with Halloween. This is going to be my personal list of rankings of the Halloween franchise. And I'm going to kind of put a little mini review into each one of them too for everyone's enjoyment. If you're one of those types of people that prefer a quick and short video, move on. If you like something deep and entertaining, then this is the video for you. I also believe that, like many other people probably think about their own list, I believe some of my rankings and some of my opinions, as opinionated as I am, may be a little bit controversial. Let me get this out of the way really quick. Do a little really quick shameless self-promotion plug. I'm going to share this on michaelmyers.net and other places, and hopefully people will enjoy it. Or maybe there are still people from the old ages of my channel that may still be watching, you know, back when I still had a full head of hair. But we'll see. In any case, I want to make a quick plug and just say it's been a long time since I did anything with my channel, but I plan on trying to resurrect it partially with this video. I've done and plan on doing many other things pertaining to my main interests: acting, voice impersonations. I have a lot of hobbies: video games, card games, martial arts. I do my own trailers. I've done a lot of stuff, and I plan on doing more. So if maybe I can reel in some extra viewers, that would be great. I do have a cheat sheet in front of me. Right on my little computer here. Just, frankly, being honest, so I remember to cover everything that I wanted to cover and don't forget anything. Without too much further ado, I'll get into the list. I want to make a few bullet points here. Most of the movies are in the franchise, quite frankly, as most of us know, despite how much we love them, most of them are crap. So try not to get too worked up over where I put them. I'm going to explain my choices very thoroughly. I'm going to list the pros and cons of each film. So regardless of the fact that some of these films suck, I'm going to do my best to try to balance them out. Believe it or not, despite the fact that I said most of these films are crap, putting this list together was actually very difficult. Because actually, from 6 on through to 1, going backwards from 10, with the exception of 10, what I rank as 10th, dead last, I enjoy all of them. But I actually do believe 6 to 1 are all on some level pretty decent films. So, without any further ado, let's officially start the list. Number 10. Halloween Resurrection. Alright, so where do I start with this one? I rank it number 10, dead last. I don't think anyone's going to be surprised by this one. Seeing as this one is one of the really bad ones, I'm going to list the pros first, especially seeing as, to me, there's not very many. So, there are some brutal kills in this film. I do believe that some of the angles, some of the ways they shot this film were pretty interesting, pretty unique. I do believe that it's a decent mask in this film. I'm pretty picky about the masks in Halloween, but I do believe that this mask was pretty good. However, that's about all the pros I have for it. And by the way, I should have prefaced this by saying, although I am opinionated, I do believe that debate is important, and as long as anyone is civil, I encourage anyone to post their comments. There might be some things that I'm missing that some other people can bring to light for me. But with that said, I'm going to transition from the last pro into the first con, because I believe it's both a strength and a weakness, which would be that the film is fairly unique with the webisode series type of plot. However, to me that's a bad concept, because Michael Myers is a horror icon, and even though there's been some hammy moments in a lot of the Michael Myers Halloween films, the whole webisode idea is just so corny. I'm a firm believer in the fact that pop culture inspires the internet, not the other way around. Movies like Fear.com and things like that, some of them are okay, but the theme of internet show just, to me, just screams corniness. You're trying to get the idea that people are actually watching this on the internet live. It's just so lame to me. That's just my opinion. I think it's too hokey for a horror film, and I think that it's the first and only Halloween film that almost comes across like a horror comedy. And Michael Myers is known for being one of the scariest horror icons of all time. So this movie pretty much just slaps Michael Myers' character in the face. I think that it's the only film that really tarnished the integrity of the franchise. Sure, a lot of them were bad, but at least they still portrayed Michael Myers in a very effective and very scary light, whereas in Halloween Resurrection, Busta Rhymes Kung Fu, enough said, it's just silly, and Michael Myers shouldn't be treated that way. I think Laurie being dead also takes away from Michael Myers' effectiveness. Maybe they needed to go in a different direction with the character, but still, it almost kind of makes him hollow after all this time, because obviously we're not dealing with Jamie Lloyd anymore, so he doesn't even have that. He has literally nothing, according to this film's storyline, other than haunting his own house, which is okay, but it just doesn't leave enough for the character. As I said, some things about it are okay, but the film isn't memorable, in my opinion. We have to make mention of the fact that this was really the film where they went over the top with the celebrities, Tyra Banks and Busta Rhymes, and Busta Rhymes isn't the only bad part about this movie, but let's be honest, it was just ridiculous and silly. Busta Rhymes in the fake Myers mask, talking to Michael Myers, not realizing he was Michael Myers. They just brought such a silly overtone to it, with little to no shred of the Halloween integrity of the franchise left. This was easily the worst film of the franchise. Number 9. Halloween 5. I'll be honest, I love this movie, but I can be honest and say that it's really not very good. So let's once again start with the pros, as this is one of the poorer movies of the franchise. I believe it's not last, simply because it does still maintain some of the integrity of a horror film and this franchise. Michael is still this unstoppable boogeyman. He's still scary. The film is still scary, even though there are some hammy moments, but it still has that pervading sense of dread, and it still has that darkness and that atmosphere that we've known throughout the Halloween franchise. I like the fact the movie, as silly as the concept may be with Jamie, that they focus on Jamie for sympathy in the film, because you don't want to see this little girl die. And after everything she's been through, despite the fact that she did what she did at the end of Halloween 4, you still feel sorry for her. At least I do as a viewer. I also love the fact that, to me, this is one of the best masks in the franchise. A lot of people don't like the Halloween 5 mask, but I love it. I just think the way it's shaped, the eyes, I just think it's a very scary looking mask. I don't know why, but I just find Halloween 5 so damn fun to watch. I also like how they focus on Michael's toying with the victims, because let's be honest, Michael does that. He doesn't just swoop in for the kill. He stalks you, he tricks you, he follows you, and just pins you in for the kill. And Halloween 5, I think, really did a great job of establishing that. I guess that's really all the pros I can think of. Overall, they make for a fun movie, but not a good movie. So the cons, as I mentioned before, ridiculous characters with just beating you over the head with over-the-top stupidity and silliness. The cops, Tina, even the concept itself, as much as I like it, can really just wear on you. Even though Donald Pleasence has been a godsend for the franchise, and probably without him the franchise may not even exist, if be as popular as it is. But it feels like by 4, already they were leaning on Donald Pleasence as a crutch. As great a job as he did in these films, it just got to the point where even he was over the top silly, despite how good at acting it was. I feel like the movie makes us hate Tina when we should love her, because she really is sympathetic to Jamie and loves her, but yet by the time she dies, we're just so happy, aren't we? And that's a shame. Jamie's murderous storyline is a little silly, despite the fact that it's a cool concept. What she did at the end of Halloween 4, yeah, it was kind of cool that she's seeing visions of Michael, and she can feel Michael killing again. I guess they have to go somewhere with the storyline if they're going to make sequels, but after a while, it just feels ridiculous. One of the things that annoyed me the most, even despite the fact that you don't see too much of it, is the introductions to Wynn and the Thorn, which I'll get into later. Thorn. So between the over-the-top silliness that's in this film and the fact that it just kind of has that bad B horror movie vibe to it, I don't think many people would argue that this one is on the list where it belongs. Number 8. Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. It's a good thing that maybe I'm not all that biased. Otherwise, this one might have been 9, if not 10. I'm going to try to balance this between the producer's cut and the original cut, because to me they're both really bad. This movie. So let's start with the pros. Probably the biggest pro is that, and I think most people agree, the mask was really good. It was scary, and it's very original. And to me, it's too bad they didn't stick with that mask, because it was very, very good. But to me, that's the biggest pro of this movie, and that's kind of sad. I do think the atmosphere is very good. It's very dark, very mysterious, almost like witchcraft-like, very gothic. There's just something about the atmosphere that makes it feel like one of the most unique Halloween films, if not the most unique, at least pre-Rob Zombie, which we'll talk about later. Some really brutal kills. I think they did a good job making them brutal, but yet not too brutal to the point where you're saying, ah, geez, this is too much. It feels like a different Halloween movie, but yet still does maintain some of that integrity of the franchise that I've mentioned numerous times already and am very big on. Michael's the star of the film. That's the thing I love the most. We get the introduction of Paul Rudd. God only knows what happened there. Frankly, his acting was not good at all. But it did introduce us to Paul Rudd, so I guess that makes it kind of a pro, seeing as he is pretty funny, in my opinion. We never see Michael's eyes, and I really like that. I think when you see too much of Michael's eyes, it kills the mystique of the character. You just always think that that mask is his face. So not seeing the eyes is always scary. The fact that they never zoom in close enough on him in the light to show his eyes, to me, is really effective. Now to the cons. Well, starting with, to me, the worst one, the Thorn concept, which to me is just silly and ridiculous, mainly, unfortunately, because of the producer's cut. Now, I can transition into my next con. I really think that Halloween 6 is the worst when it comes to attention to details. I wouldn't go as far as to call them plot holes, but there's so many things that don't make sense. So many things that are just too silly, too coincidental to have possibly happened, let alone all of them in one film. Between finding the baby in the train station, there's nobody at the train station, there's so many silly little things. If you are at all a stickler for detail, this is easily the worst film in the Halloween franchise. They did a little bit better a job in the producer's cut with that, as with many other things. But the producer's cut just puts, it's just so over the top silly with the Thorn cultist suits and Michael being controlled by Wynn just standing there. What Paul Rudd did with the diagram on the floor, that was kind of cool. And it was better, I admit, than the original cut. But the Thorn silliness was so over the top that, to me, it made the film just as bad as the original cut. Michael becomes a celebrity status, and I really hated that. He's on TV. We've got the radio host going into the Michael Myers house, which, yeah, you don't need anybody's permission to go in their freaking house, right? The story seems like it's becoming desperate, like they're desperately trying to hang on to some storyline semblance of this character. Of course, that's the problem when you make sequels based on a character who's mysterious that you know almost nothing about. There's something unforgivable that needs to be mentioned about this movie that I don't think really gets much mention, which is the fact that there's virtually no interaction, if not any interaction in the movie at all, I think, between Loomis and Myers. I mean, isn't that partially what makes the whole franchise work? But they never interact in the movie, at least not a single time that I can recall. And that's just unforgivable. I'm pretty sure that applies to both cuts. I'd like to think some people agree with me, and it feels like it's maybe the most polarized film of the franchise. A lot of people love it, a lot of people hate it. I love certain things about it, but overall, my God. But at least I can still stand to watch it and enjoy it, unlike Halloween Resurrection. Number 7. Halloween 4. Boy, this film has me very, very torn. At one point, I had Halloween 4 ranked as high as third on the list. At this point, it finds its way to 7, and I should correct myself. I said 6 to 1, I think, all have very good merits, but I meant to say 7 through 1 because I think Halloween 4 has a lot of merits. So let's start with the cons. Michael is becoming inhumanly strong. Maybe there's nothing wrong with that, but we're clearly getting the idea that, well, now, seeing as he burned to death, and yet here he is, he has this superhuman strength where he's crushing people with his bare hands, and this is where the silliness really began. But some people might consider that a good thing, that they're establishing him as this mystic being that can't be killed, and that is pertinent to his character and what it would become. But still, it's really, really silly. The storyline seems a little bit forced to me, because it was clear that they just wanted to make a sequel with Michael Myers. But it was doomed from the start because we have a definitive sequel where Michael dies, and now, well, it's making money, so we need to bring him back. It wasn't as silly as 5, and it still maintained a lot of dread, but there really were some silly scenes. Namely, the scene with the priest. My lord. Loomis already feels like he's becoming saturated and overdramatic, but again, yet again, still somehow he manages to be the glue that holds these films together, because that's how talented Donald Pleasence is. And yep, once again, lots of coincidences in this film, but I do believe there's some big pros in this film. The pros, which is why I started with the cons instead of the pros, because now we're approaching territory of the films that I actually like, and believe there are more pros than cons, just that those cons are still enough to hold them back from being good movies. So the pros, number 1, to me, is going back to basics. It's not quite as effective as the first 2 films, or mainly just the first one, but it is Michael being stocky and using appropriate lighting and building dread and suspense. That scene in the alleyway where Rachel sees Michael walking towards her and she climbs the fence, I love that. I really do think there's some really good senses of dread in this film. The atmosphere is excellent to me. So there's some unique moments, even if they seem a little silly, like the multiple Myers scene. As silly as it was, I thought it was a nice little touch. I also like the potential torch passing to Jamie, even though I stated that the concept was silly. Had they gone in a different direction with it, it might have been even better. Maybe she would become the new Michael Myers character, similar to what they're doing with Fiona Dourif in Cult of Chucky. The mask is creepy. The irony is, I used to hate this mask, and I've seen Halloween 4 many, many times and always hated it. Upon watching it again, as I've watched all the Halloween films this past Halloween, preparing for this video, I found myself all of a sudden that it's growing on me. There are certain scenes where, as it's been detailed, it looks different, but certain scenes I think the mask actually looks very effective, because to me, it is maybe the most emotionless blank mask in the entire franchise. Meeker's a badass. Sheriff Meeker is really cool. You know, Sheriff Brackett may be more memorable because of how classic he was, but Meeker got his hands dirty, and I think that's one thing we can remember about the film, is that in a way he was a hero and he cared. So it's a short list of pros, but it's also a short list of cons. And I think the pros outweighed the cons. Even though it does still kind of have that B-movie grade atmosphere to it, I still like the film a lot and think it was effective enough that it actually holds its own as a decent Halloween sequel. Number 6. Halloween 2, the Rob Zombie version. Yeah, I know I'm probably going to get in a lot of trouble for this one. I shouldn't, seeing as you think 6 is pretty far down on the list. So let me start with the cons, because I know that there are a lot of people out there, and I'm specifically talking to these people. It's one of the reasons I did this video, that hate the Rob Zombie franchise. I'm hoping I'm going to change your perspective on this. At least some of you. Probably won't, but I'm going to try, because these movies are actually pretty good. So let's start with the cons. The biggest one, obviously, being Rob Zombie's incessant need to turn every film of his into a white trash-themed movie. It is quite over the top. Granted, this applies less to Halloween 2 and more to Rob Zombie's first Halloween venture because it's something you expected. Michael is constantly unmasked, which is another thing that just helps kill it. Some of my pros will kind of counter the cons, but if you're looking at it from a purist form of view, which I know many of you do, and that's the reason you hate these two films, it really sucks. But if you can look at it from a unique perspective, it's not too hard to accept. But I can understand why it pisses people off. It does ruin the mystique of the character that most of the movie his mask is off. What is that? Another thing is that Laurie is supposed to be the sympathetic character, whereas in this movie she's so grating. Even though she's this terribly psychologically damaged, innocent girl, and you're supposed to feel sorry for her like you felt sorry for Laurie Strode in the first two films, for some reason, I think a lot of us come to hate her because she's just so annoying and so grating, and she can't go a single sentence without using the F word. I actually like some of the dream sequences, but some of them just don't make any sense, and they're a little over the top. Sam Loomis is insufferable in this film. It says a lot about the strengths of this film that I'm ranking it this high, because the other things I can accept as a purist who accepts a new perspective. But Sam Loomis, my God. Malcolm McDowell is a great actor, but it's just a bad direction. He's so almost unrealistically narcissistic. How can you be such a professional, down-to-earth individual before these events, and then after this events, you are the cockiest SOB on planet Earth? Every scene with him just makes me want to shoot myself. But we'll get to the pros, and there's a lot of them. There's a lot of things I love about this movie. That might seem just a little bit shocking, coming from the guy that did this video.
No! No!
Well, I guess I changed my mind. I'll start off by saying, prior to doing this video, I had only seen this film once. Much like many of you, I hated it. But I watched it a second time before doing this video. I loved it. Somehow, it ended up going from number 10 all the way up to number 6, and to me that's big. The biggest pro is that the story itself is almost entirely Zombie's vision. I think a lot of people get annoyed that people try to recreate other people's visions. But you can't really accuse Zombie of that in this one, because this movie was almost completely unique. It was nothing like Rosenthal's Halloween 2. It was an entirely different film. The scenes in the hospital were only brief, and even those were very different. The entire movie was just a completely unique concept. And whether you like it or not, the supernatural elements, the dream sequences, it was so different, and it was actually kind of scary. I just loved how unique it felt, that I couldn't even feel the need to compare it to the original Halloween 2 because it was just an entirely different film, and I love that. Michael looks more human, and the story is consistent with that, yet it still makes him larger than life and like invincible. The movie really quenches your thirst for blood and gore if you're that type of horror fan, and yet still keeps up with the suspense of the Halloween franchise. It's a pretty good balance as far as I'm concerned. It's very artistic and flashy, and that's not for everybody. The Halloween movies are generally very dark, but this one is too, but they do throw more colors and more style at you, and very stylish kills and stylish sequences, and it's very in your face. A lot of very disturbing and intense imagery as well. This is definitely a hard rated R film. All of this makes it very entertaining. I don't think any Halloween film before it has been that unique and that artistic. Michael is a unique character, but you can do it two ways. You can do it how these two films did it, where you're studying the character because you want to know what makes him think the way he thinks, or you could do it the original way, which is you don't know anything about the character, and that's what makes him mysterious, and that's what makes him scary. But just because you do one doesn't mean you can't do the other. Both styles are effective in the right environment. You cannot compare these films to the original ones and use the same means of judgment. It just doesn't work. You have to look at them as separate. If you can't do that, then you're not going to be able to give the film its due credit. But these are not bad movies. They're very different. Am I saying they're great films? Hell no. But they're solid. Better than most of the other Halloween films. Let's be honest. How many of you who sit there and say, I hate Rob Zombie's films, they're abominations? Are you trying to tell me that Halloween 5 was great? That Resurrection was great? Come on. They're at least better films than half of the other films in the franchise. Laurie is boldly important in the film, and that's something that I really appreciate. Even if she is grating, she's still very much the focus. And they really do some unique things with the brother-sister relationship, connecting them with the dreams, and she has the visions, and at the end, she almost becomes him. It's very different, and even though she is grating, they really made her character very meaningful and very much connected to Michael. The torch passing setup in the end was very good. And I also have to say that Brad Dourif, I thought, had a very strong performance in this movie. And he's a throwback to classic horror films. The Rob Zombie films are not as bad as you'd like to think they are. It's better than most of the other sequels, and you know it. Number 5. Halloween 3. Boy, this is an interesting one because it started way down on my list, just like Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, and after viewing it again, it jumped up much higher. So let's start with the cons first. There is some terrible acting in this film. It's not bad all the way around, but Adkins is insufferable in some points of this film. There is some over-the-top silliness with some of the characters. These stupid supporting characters that get put in the movie just to die off, like that family that ends up locked in the room towards the end. It's like they have to just ruin the film with some sort of over-the-top, Leave It to Beaver type nonsense that just tries to derail the whole film and derail its atmosphere. And that's one thing that really annoyed me about the film. The concept seems absurd. And, I mean, a novelty company runs everything in the town. Really? It just is completely unrealistic. And the story seems to go a little overboard with the robots and whatnot. But despite these few cons, I actually really like the movie. Why? Mainly because the movie is so effective at what it does that it actually helps to alleviate the negative effects of the cons. And that's a rare thing for a movie of this magnitude. So let's start with the pros. The idea is very unique. It seems silly, but it is a very unique idea. It's memorable. The best thing to me about the film is that Cochran is the devil incarnate. In some ways, I would argue that he's scarier than Michael Myers. The acting was fantastic. He was so brooding and so downright evil, even if his intentions seem silly. Every kid is going to wear these masks on Halloween night, and you want to do this why? His explanation really didn't make any sense. But you could buy it because he's just that evil and that insane. And I wish the movie had featured him more because he was just so downright evil. The atmosphere is very suspenseful and very dreadful. It seemed like it really was a Carpenter Halloween film just without Michael Myers. A little silly, but still effective. More great John Carpenter music. Actually, I'm not sure if he performed it or wrote it, but it sounds very similar to the soundtrack in Halloween 2, which to me was a strong point of Halloween 2. The visual effects are pretty cool. For a movie made in the 80s, most of the effects were pretty good. All the scenes with the mask bursting, I thought were actually very difficult to watch. And that's a hallmark of a good horror film. There's various thoughtful themes and social commentary in the film, at least the way I interpret it, and about consumerism and parenting, and I think that's kind of cool. And also, the ending is very interesting because it pretty much makes it out like the end of the world. The worst is going to happen, but we don't see, and it leaves it to our imaginations, and I like that. I think that the film overall is so atmospheric and so effective and so scary that it easily covers up its flaws, despite how big they are. And to me, that is a hallmark of an effective horror movie, so that's why I rank it so far on the list. I think a lot of people disagree about this film, but it's another one that I'd like to open up people's eyes to, because it really is an effective film, in my opinion. Number 4. Halloween, the Rob Zombie version. Continuing from my discussion about Halloween 2 from Rob Zombie, I rate this one a little higher. Why? Well, first, let's start with the cons. Same as the second one, too much white trash. Why does Michael Myers have to come from a family like that? Well, I guess because if we're doing a character study, we need to have a reason for him becoming what he became, but it still is way too much. That scene with the guard in Michael's room with that young woman, that was just, not only was it wrong, but it was just so silly and over the top. I think it cheapens the original movie by trying to mimic it too much, and you hear some of the same lines, only not performed nearly as well as Donald Pleasance. It kind of grates on my nerves a little bit because Malcolm McDowell's a good actor, but he's trying to recreate a masterful performance, but it feels like he's just trying a little too hard. Laurie's not likable, which is, to me, is one of the biggest problems of the film. We're supposed to love her. We're supposed to see her as the good girl. Whereas in this one, the only reason we care about her is because she is an innocent girl. But in the end, she really doesn't end up being that likable good girl that we know. She's maybe a little different than her friends, but ultimately, I don't feel like we feel nearly as sorry for her as we do for Jamie Lee Curtis. The origin story, to me, lessens Michael's impact and his creepiness. But I'm going to transition that into the pros, which is that it is unique, that they established that we're going to go a different route with Michael. We're going to focus on what made him the way he is. And again, you may not like it, but it is an effective way to do a film. You can make killers scary in other means by making them mysterious. It bases the story partially on the sibling thing, so there's not really a twist in the sequel to ruin the mystique, as I discussed earlier. So it's established from the get-go, and therefore you can do more with the story, and it makes sense because, as I've already established, that's what they were doing, differentiating it from the original franchise. The storyline is a little bit more effective with Laurie, as I said, bleeds into Halloween 2. Brad Dourif and other throwbacks to horror, as I said before, and he was okay. I thought he was better in Halloween 2, but he is a cool character. The story works fairly well on its merits that are separate from the original franchise, as I said before. It kind of mimics the original film, but still does a lot of unique things, and I appreciate that. And that's one of the reasons why it's this high on the list, because it is, in my opinion, a good film. It changes things a little bit, but it keeps some things the same. And I think that's a good way to go about a remake. So why is it higher than Halloween 2 on my list, you may ask? It doesn't have as much flash and over-the-top campiness as the second one does. It tries to be a little bit more grounded. So I think that earns it a few extra points. The mask is excellent, and that's obviously one of my high points. The mask is just so scary looking, and then with the stitches, and bleeding into my last point, which I think is one of the most important, is that Tyler Mane as Michael Myers is awesome. He's different, but he's awesome. Tyler Mane is a huge mountain of a man, and between his size and his presence and how scary the mask looks, he is an excellent Michael Myers. Tyler Mane is downright intimidating, and not only does that fit this direction better, it also makes it scarier because it is consistent with the basis. I'll end the Rob Zombie franchise on those notes and say, guys, they're not as bad as you think. I know you're purists. I'm a purist. as well, and I will always appreciate the other Halloween films for the most part more, but I do still like these films. They have a lot of merits. You just need to open your eyes and look at them. They are overall fairly well-made films, different, stylish, effective. They're good, guys. Number 3. Halloween H2O. So I'm going to jump right into this one because this one's a little polarizing as well. The cons, there is a bit of silliness, a little too many jump scares, too many human moments for Michael in my opinion. Like, he spared that woman, I guess maybe because she was with her daughter, I don't know. But he seemed almost too human. And the thing that I hate the most is the mask. I really hate the H2O mask. I think it looks silly. I think it looks sad rather than scary and emotionless. And there's too much focus on his eyes. Remember, I talked about the eyes earlier, and in Halloween 6 how you don't see his eyes, and it made it so effective. But despite that, Michael Myers is fairly scary in the film. Maybe you could see it as a little silly as they were starting to go the Hollywood direction. But it still maintains that integrity of the franchise, now that I'm getting into the pros. Michael and Laurie are the stars of the film. Laurie is maybe stronger now than she was before, despite how she's been tormented over the years. And now she and Michael are basically dueling to the death. She's still scared, but now she's a woman, and she's fighting Michael and outsmarting him. And I thought the payoff was good, and the confrontation scenes were pretty awesome. Michael's return concept was clever and sensible in my opinion. You know, the whole thing about he's turning 17 and how her paranoia came true. I thought that was pretty cool. The film, yet again, goes back to basics, builds suspense and dread, and really focuses on Michael and Laurie and introducing her son and everything. I think it was a pretty good story arc. I think it has a good supporting cast. Characters that you actually are kind of sad to see go when they go because they're likable. Throwbacks to original music and lines, which I thought was very good. The theme sounded very similar to the first. They do bring up some of those older lines or reference them, but they don't go overboard with it like some of the new like Star Wars movies do, for instance, where they need to hit you over the head with a reference every 5 minutes. It's a big budget Hollywood film, but yet it still does maintain that integrity I talked about of Michael Myers and his invincibility and his brooding. Again, if only you didn't have to see his eyes so much. And it connects Michael and Laurie together without a whole bunch of silliness. Not too much more to say about this one. I just thought that it was a very solid Halloween film. Excuse me, and again, a lot of these movies are kind of crappy in some ways, and I think despite the fact that Halloween H2O is a distant number 3 from number 2 and number 1, it still deserves that number 3 spot. It's a good horror film. There's a little silliness, but it doesn't compromise the integrity and the suspense. And I think that helps make Halloween H2O one of the better films, which is quite an accomplishment for a movie that does take a franchise into that more almost celebrity category. Number 2. Halloween 2. Probably not surprising. It's no shock at this point what number 1 is. So let me explain why I believe it's number 2. I think a lot of people agree that it's probably the second best Halloween film, but it's a distant second. But I'm going to talk about it because, admittedly, I do have some personal bias towards this film. I really love Halloween 2. So let's start with the cons. Number 1. How does nobody see Michael Myers standing there? Is this like Pokemon? Nobody has any peripheral vision. You can't see a shadow in the back there in the room behind the curtain? Really? The missing sibling connection bothers me. They indicate that Michael is her brother, almost just to have something interesting to add to the movie. I don't think Laurie ever really finds out she's his sister in the film, and that's something that a lot of people, I don't think anybody really talks about. But it really just felt like a wet fart, despite the fact that it's supposed to be important, and it kind of does feel important, but they didn't make it important enough. There are some silly plot holes between Laurie and Michael. The flashback scene of Laurie's mother talking about it. It's like, this doesn't really make any sense. I thought that she was too young to... Whatever. And that's a big deal. Quite frankly, a plot hole that big is pretty gaping. So it goes to show you just how bad this franchise is overall that you could consider this one to be maybe the best sequel. The desolate hospital is a bothersome thing. Is nobody in this hospital? I know it's a small town, but come on. But I'll give them a pass because, again, how are you going to spend the sort of time needed to establish that there are other people in the hospital? The nurses would have other things to be attending to, and they wouldn't be preoccupied with Michael Myers and Laurie Strode. Plus, I think it does kind of help give the film its own atmosphere, which I'll get into later. Michael and Laurie are both less focused on, to the point to me where it seems like seeing Michael is a treat in this film. You see a fair amount of him, but maybe not as much as you should. And in my opinion, you use the first movie to really establish the origin of the character, and then the sequel, you need to show a lot of that character because that's why people are paying to see the movie. And then half of the kills in the film are kind of lackluster only because you don't actually see them. If you're going to commit to having a little bit more blood and gore to catch up with the rest of the genre, you should probably be a little bit more detailed. The thing I hate the most about the film is that it's been talked about how legendary that ending was with Donald Pleasance at the beginning doing the, as the fable story goes, that he said to John Carpenter, I could do it one of two ways. I could say, oh my God, or I could be like, I knew this would happen. And he went with, I knew this would happen. And it was legendary. But they retconned that in Halloween 2 and showed him surprised and shocked. I shot him 6 times! I shot him in the heart! He still did a great job, but that just seemed like a 180 from the first film. The funny thing is that's a lot of cons, and I'm maybe a little bit biased towards this film, but I think overall it's still easily the second best film in the franchise. It follows the same story and the production values as the first one. It really does feel like a direct sequel. It's the same night. The directorial style is similar. The chemistry between Jamie Lee and Lance Guest to me is fantastic in the film. They really do kind of come across like two young people who have a thing for each other. They're being a little flirty, genuinely care about each other, and despite how little of the film focuses on that, it still feels genuine. And I think it also means that Lance Guest's character is yet another character that you actually care about. The increased sympathy for Laurie has been debated. Deborah Hill and others have said that they don't like the fact that she's the heroine and yet she's almost helpless. But I like it because she is the hero of the first film. She did fight back. She did survive. She did the same in Halloween 2, despite the fact that she was practically comatose in a bed, and she still managed to outsmart Michael enough to get away and to get into safe hands. And that fear that we have for her as she's being hunted when she's even more vulnerable than before, to me that's very effective. The whole sibling connection could have done better, but I do think it was kind of cool. And he really did establish himself as the boogeyman at the end of the first film, and the second film expanded upon it. You might say that motivations are less mysterious and less scary, but when you're dealing with someone who apparently cannot be killed, to me, it creates even more sympathy for the character. Similar to Linda Hamilton in The Terminator. What's coming after her is an unstoppable killing machine, and it does have a motive, and that is very scary. Loomis is still an excellent link to Myers, and he has a lot of good lines in the film when he was talking about how we're all scared of the dark inside ourselves and what Sam Hain is really about. I thought that was really cool. He does a really good job expanding upon his explanations of who and what Michael is, and really doing his best to really elevate Michael to that mythical status all by himself. I would say that some of the kills were unique, despite the fact that, as I said before, some of them weren't focused on enough, but some of them were a little grotesque and difficult to watch. So it upped the violence without being too violent. Some of the more unique kills have more gore without killing the suspense, and I think that's also a high point of the film. Despite the fact that the desolate hospital thing is considered a con, to me it also kind of makes the film distinctive. It gives it like a strange, odd, surrealistic feel to it. And besides, how much time can you really spend focusing on what's going on in the hospital when you need to focus on your two main characters, which they had a hard enough time doing already. So I'll give it a pass for that. There are many things about this film that make it unique. Michael is even more stoic and catatonic in this film, and that's something else that I really like. It's almost like he was killed in the first movie and now he's risen from the dead like a zombie, which to me can be just as scary. The last few pros that I'm going to mention all kind of intertwine, and I think they ultimately make Halloween 2 a great horror film and the best sequel despite so many flaws. The first, which is the lighting and the camera angles. It's the same mask, and yet there are so many different angles that make the mask look so much different than it did in a previous scene. And I think that's really, really cool. Which also leads into the fact that, to me, the greatest asset of the film is Dick Warlock as the Shape. Although he might not have moved as gracefully as Nick Castle, he still had some very, very distinctive and very memorable movements and motions in the film. And the most important thing was the way he wore the mask, the famous Warlock stretch, it is called. And to me, that Warlock stretch made the mask look so much more ominous and so much scarier. You could say that being emotionless is scarier, but I actually think that the kind of, depending on the angle you look at it, and that's another unique thing, is that there are times where the mask looks like a cocky smile, there are times where it looks sad, and then there are times where it just looks downright angry. And to me, that's one of the best aspects of the film. Given everything that's been said about the mask, presuming that all of it is true about Deborah's not taking very good care of the mask and cigarette smoke and the grime and the stretch all gave the mask such a distinct look that you could almost swear it was a different mask. And then we have the music. A lot of people would say that it's not as good as the first one. Maybe not, but in many ways I think it's actually better, that it's more effective. It just has such a dark, ominous, almost gothic tone to it that to me it's way scarier than in the first film and is more suspenseful. And they added a lot of stuff to it and really expanded the soundtrack. And I think the combination of how ominous the mask looks, the camera angles, the music, I think it helps give the film its own identity, and to me that is so important. Dick Warlock, the music, and some of the lighting and camera effects all together just made this movie so effective, even despite all its flaws. Number 1. Halloween. Boy, what a shocker there, huh? But I might do something that I think a lot of other people haven't done. I am going to point out its cons because the thing is, Halloween is a very flawed film. Ultimately, though, similar to what I said about Halloween 3, a film that is ultimately that well made and that effective will easily cover up its flaws. So let's get into the flaws. Yet again, why does no one have peripheral vision? There are numerous points in this film, just like the second one, where you can't tell me nobody sees him. There are some visible mistakes that have been talked about, the palm trees, and the one that really kills it for me, it doesn't kill it for me, but it's pretty funny, is the wrench in Michael's hand when he smashes the car window early in the film. There are a few bloodless scenes where there should have been some, mainly the scene where Annie is killed because she literally has her throat slashed, but there's no mark, there's no blood at all. Again, an effective movie will make you forgive its flaws, but that is a pretty big flaw. Of course, I don't think it was done by design, but seriously, why are all those mental patients allowed to just walk around? Why did that happen? Especially why Michael? I don't feel like anyone ever talks about this. Another thing is, apparently Michael has terrible aim. I know he's been in a mental facility for most of his life, but seriously, you're standing right behind Laurie, and she's barely moving, and you go to slice her, and you just barely get her arm? And then you had Michael completely missing her again, uh, which I believe was prior to that scene, when he was behind the couch, and he just comes from behind the couch and stabs the couch. Like, as legendary as it was, the kill where he stabs Bob and sticks Bob to the door with the knife, I really don't think that's possible. I'm probably wasting my time by saying this, but still, I think it's worth pointing out that it's a little ridiculous. Okay, I know I'm nitpicking, but why does it take Michael so long to get around the back of the house in the chase scene at the end? What was he doing? Did he stop off to make some coffee? I don't know. Laurie does make a few dumb decisions, despite the fact she is the hero and the one we cheer for, and it's always said that we really care for about her. She is still making a lot of dumb decisions. She drops the knife again. Keep the knife in your hand until the guy's dead. The last little nitpick is, how did Loomis not hear Laurie scream at the end there? He couldn't have been that far down. She was screaming bloody murder during that chase scene, and he didn't see or hear anything? He just walked by and, oh, there's the car. I mean, it's a small town. It has to be in the same vicinity. It's nighttime. There's not really any noise. You can't tell me he didn't hear her scream. I should point out that none of these flaws are at all ruining the experience of the movie for me, but there are little things that if you're a stickler to detail, you can't help but notice. The good news is that's all the cons, and for the most part, they were mostly just nitpicks. So let's get into the pros, even though you've heard them all a million times before. Why not? The directing is excellent. Everything about it, the lighting, the music, the way it was shot, the way it was edited, even the flaws in the film can be excused for the simple fact that they didn't have much time to put the film together. I'd say for as much as they were crunched for time, it was so well done. The suspense, the lighting, the way everything was done, the dolly shots, it was all so unique at the time and still holds up today. I especially like the touch of Michael appearing behind the clothesline, switching to Laurie's eyesight, switching back, and he's gone. I thought that was a really clever technique. Once again, these are things that you can easily overlook today. If you think of where we were in film at the time, it seems even more impressive today, and yet still holds up as some very, very effective directing. Various shots and views of Michael, similar to what I said in Halloween 2, despite the fact that I think the Halloween 2 mask is more effective. Some of these angles and views, that the lighting is just so creepy. Some of the scenes are just so scary simply because of that mask. The mask is legendary. That has to be the number one, well, maybe not the number one pro, but one of the biggest pros that I probably don't even need to mention, but I'm mentioning it anyways. That mask. So good. So legendary. The film's dark atmosphere is what helped Halloween become one of the scariest films of all time. I will say personally, as a viewer, that I love horror movies, and one of the things that will always make this film legendary is how uncomfortable and how actually scary it is. That to this day, it is the only horror film I've ever watched that still to this day, after seeing it probably 100 times, especially at nighttime, makes me paranoid. There's something about the effectiveness of some of those shots. Michael standing across the street on the porch when Tommy looks out the window, just think, and how the music goes with it. These things are so scary that when I'm done watching the film, especially at night, I feel like every time I'm blinking my eyes and looking down the hallway of my apartment, I'm just waiting to see Michael stand there. That when I look out the window at night, I'm expecting to see Michael standing there. No other horror film has ever had that type of psychological effect on me. Not over a long-term period, anyways. This has consistently stuck with me through all the years that I've been watching the film and the franchise. And that is about the highest compliment I can give a horror movie. Michael's creepiness and patience and stoicism throughout the film is especially creepy. Even though I defended them giving him a motive in Halloween 2, it is the lack of motive in the first one partially that makes him so terrifying. That and the way that Nick Castle moved. Some of the movements are just so inhuman and so creepy and so scary, so almost dreamlike, especially at the end when he slowly sits up and turns his head towards Laurie. Human beings don't move like that, and that's one of the things that makes Michael so legendary. Nick Castle helped make Michael legendary. Michael became the true boogeyman of film. We can talk all day about Freddy Krueger and Jason and Leatherface and all of those admittedly wonderful horror icons, but no one has that boogeyman effect down like Michael Myers does. No one. Despite what I said about her making some dumb decisions, this movie did a great job of establishing our hero as someone we really cared about and really sympathized with and even felt sorry for and came to love and wanted to see her survive. And Jamie Lee is just so likable in the film. Donald Pleasence's acting and lines, those sort of things are just so invaluable to the film, and Donald Pleasance, what can you say, is one of the biggest reasons that the film was so effective. Donald Pleasance does such a good job establishing Michael Myers as that boogeyman all by himself. There's something else that I don't think John Carpenter and crew even gets enough credit for, which is the fact that the movie made clear that Michael was different. There was something not right about Michael, that he was above and beyond with all the feats that he could do that were just inhuman, in especially getting shot at the end and all the things he endured, that not only was he not normal, but that he might not be human, that he might be something more. As much as people complain about the invincibility and how he's unstoppable in most of the movies, it did start with Halloween 1. But where John Carpenter deserves credit is the fact that he managed to pull it off despite it being subtle. They didn't hit you over the top of the head with it. They didn't shove it in your face. They made it almost questionable, to the point where people to this day still debate if he was even supernatural or not human, despite all the silly sequels that followed. People still actually debate about it. And that goes to show you how incredibly subtle it was, that we know Michael's not a normal human, but yet they pulled it off in such a way that was so smooth. And that deserves a lot of credit. I think I've listed just about everything I need to list. I didn't tell you anything you didn't already know about Halloween 1, at least I don't think I did. If I did, cool. May go without saying, but obviously this film is just so excellent. So that was the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to give you many more reviews, and maybe even individual reviews on each movie in the future. So if you liked what you saw, please subscribe, please watch more of my videos, and stay tuned, because I hopefully will be bringing you some more new material soon. Thank you.